Hello, everybody. Welcome. As you are coming into the webinar, we're curious to know where you're tuning in from. If you'd like to let us know in the chat, let us know where you are in the world. We're always very curious. And we are excited to welcome you to another installment of our research webinar series. This is a series that is being put on by the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy. And my name is Victor, and I'm just going to say a few words to begin about the coalition, about the research webinar series. This is our presentation for today. As I'm sure you all know, we're pleased to have Dr. Alexander Tournier with us to speak about what is sure to be a very interesting talk on homeopathy between matter and light. And so you can find us online at homeopathycoalition.ca. There's also a Facebook page and Instagram page where you can be kept up to date about future events and the actions and initiatives of the coalition. But in brief, the coalition was founded in April of 2022, and the fundamental mission is to bring together patient associations, homeopathic practitioners, researchers, and industry stakeholders who wish to promote homeopathy in Canada and preserve the freedom of choice in medicine. Some of the primary objectives is to educate the public on the many benefits of homeopathy, to really just spread the news of homeopathy in Canada, and to do as much as we can to ensure that homeopathy is a vital healthcare option for all Canadians. We also are very much concerned with debunking false information or misinformation about homeopathy. And that's one of the objectives of the research webinar series, is to show not only people who are already very much in line with homeopathic thinking and homeopathic philosophy and homeopathic treatment, but also the general public and other medical professionals who perhaps don't know much about homeopathy or would like to learn more. We would like to provide a reliable source of information for these groups as well. We also are very much oriented around diving into cutting edge research, which supports the efficacy of homeopathy and defending and promoting access to homeopathic medicine in Canada. So we have a number of very exciting presentations that we have arranged for the next year. The next presentation is with Dr. Ronald Whitmont, and he's going to be talking about homeopathy and research in pain, treatment of various disorders involving pain. In April, we have a recording of Dr. Rachel Roberts, along with a live panel discussion. So that will be a very exciting presentation. May 7th, we have Ananda Moore on homeopathy and infectious diseases. June 4th, we have Richard Grossinger, who's speaking of the basis of homeopathic microdoses. And in September, we have Dr. Esther Vanderwerf, who is the clinical research lead at the HRI. And it will be an exciting presentation on the role of homeopathy in antimicrobial resistance. In October, we have a presentation by Dr. Christophe Merville on the French observational study. And then to wrap everything up in December, we have a presentation by Dr. Joe Pollock, who is a renowned researcher in the field of water and water research. So very exciting. And if you would like to stay up to date with the presentations, all of these presentations are free. You can go to our website at homeopathycoalition.ca and sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, and you can stay in the loop about all the upcoming presentations. And just for anyone who is curious, yes, all the presentations are recorded, and they are all put up on YouTube in case you can't attend any of them live. And so with that, I will hand it over to Liz, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Thanks, Victor. Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth Chapman, and I'm with Canadians for Homeopathy, which is a member of the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy. And we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Alex Tournier today to present a lecture titled Homeopathy Between Light and Matter. Dr. Tournier is a physicist and biophysics expert with an illustrious academic background from Imperial College London, Cambridge University, and the University of Heidelberg. As the founding director of the Homeopathy Research Institute, Dr. Tournier has dedicated his career to advancing our understanding of homeopathy through rigorous scientific research. Welcome, Dr. Alexander Tournier.
Great. Thanks for the introductions, Liz. So many thanks to the organizers for having me today. Is everybody hearing me correctly? Yes, I can see there's a little thumbs up. That probably means that people can hear me. So I will share my screen. There we go. I was asked to present today on the topic that's really on my mind when it comes to homeopathy. Is the plausibility argument. And so I'm asked a lot about is homeopathy possible? What do we know about it? As a physicist, what do you think? So before I jump into this talk, I'd like to just recap quickly onto what Liz just mentioned about my CV. So I'm a physicist by training. I did straight physics at Imperial College in London, and then I went to do theoretical physics in Cambridge. So things like quantum theory and general relativity, things like that. And then I went on to do my PhD on water structures around proteins um, at the University of Heidelberg. And so you'll see this comes handy in my talk. I then went on as a postdoc to work for Cancer Research UK, one of the largest, or the largest charity dedicated to cancer research. And while at my time there, I studied homeopathy at the Center for Homeopathic Education. So I'm also a registered homeopath in England, although I don't practice. But I really wanted to understand homeopathy, and that's why I really took the time to study. And also, while I was in London, I studied the Homeopathy Research Institute. For those who would recall, there was a lot of attacks against homeopathy at the time, and I was being approached a lot with this question of the research in homeopathy, and it became very clear to me that we needed to have a place where people could go to for homeopathic information, homeopathy research information. And so hence the Homeopathy Research Institute. So here's quickly the website and the URL. If you don't know it, I highly recommend that you go and have a look. We have over 200 pages of information in different languages. Some of the favorite answers and questions section is in over 10 languages now. So so that was the big focus in London. And then the organization has grown a lot over the years. I see from the program that just flashed on the screen that you'll have Rachel Roberts. So Rachel is the CEO now of the Homeopathy Research Institute, and things are running well and we're expanding. In particular, we are having in June this year next homeopathy research dedicated conference, this time in Greece, in Thessaloniki. It should be really nice. So it's in June of this year for those who are interested in diving into homeopathy research. We have generally 35 presentations from leading experts around the world. So, so that's kind of HRI and how that came about. After the HRI started to grow, I wanted to go myself into the research. So eventually I joined the University of Bern under Professor Stefan Baumgartner, where it's under the research for complementary medicines. And that's so where I continue now to work to research fundamental questions about homeopathy. And one of the things that we've just kind of finished actually is a review of all the theories of homeopathy. As you'll know, maybe there's many theories that have been proposed over the years as to how homeopathy works. So we're just publishing something on that. But today I didn't want to talk to you about that so much. I wanted to focus on one particular um, um, theory that I find particularly interesting. And with that theory to really dive into the overall question of can we at all formulate a question, formulate a theory of homeopathy? So here's the main driving question for me through this talk. Um, is it possible to formulate a plausible theory of how homeopathy works? So there's been a lot of kind of hand-wavy theories or theories that tackle parts of the problem. And here I wanted to show that it is possible, in principle, to have a theory that actually explains what we see in homeopathy and is actually quite compatible with modern theory in not only in spirit but in detail. Uh, all the details are not worked out, and that's I'm not saying this is the final theory, or it probably isn't, but it has all the ingredients that we would expect of such a theory, and it stands together quite neatly, as I hope you will agree. So to jump in, um, what we what we're looking at for when we try to explain homeopathy is 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 a number of requirements we have. We need a phenomena or uh, an ingredient, something that will be bioactive. At the end of the day, we're going to give something to patients, or if we're in the lab, we're going to give it to a plant or cells, or maybe an animal if you're a vet. And so we need something that's going to be bioactive in that sense. And then we know that in homeopathy, for example, we have a huge set of remedies, over 2,000. Some libraries have over 3,000 remedies. So we know that there's a huge amount of information that needs to be passed along, that needs to get to the patient. And we know that it's subtle. If you recall the complexities of the different polycrests, then sulfur materia medica is huge, net mure materia medica. With all its subtleties, all the polycrests have many subtleties. And so all that subtlety needs to be somehow recorded and given to the patient in a way that will work with the patient. Um, and we know that in some way, it needs to work through the dilution and succussion process. So homeopathy is prepared through this serial dilution and succussion process. And that's always been the point of contention with homeopathy. How can something so diluted ever hope to have any effect, and can ever be a therapeutic agent in any meaningful way? And so we know that's the thing that we need to look at, and it needs to work at high dilutions. So that's kind of like, the game that we're playing, and we need to fulfill these three requirements. And so I want to tell you about um, a, a theory that comes from laser theory, as I mentioned just afterwards, is also called quantum coherence domains. The quantum coherence domains is a prediction that water would form groups of water that would have a collective behavior, in particular a vibrational oscillatory behavior, and that these structures would be about 100 nanometer across. So 100 nanometers, to give you an idea of scale, is about the size of a typical protein. So it would be very compatible with life in the right length scale. And also it would be very common. In liquid, it would form 25% or more of the volume of a liquid. It's it's hypothesized to be very ubiquitous. It would be very normal. It's present in water, in normal water. It wouldn't be something exotic in that sense. Its behavior is what we're interested about, but it would be quite normal and present everywhere. So that's the kind of the ingredient that comes from theory, and actually the theory comes from these people. So Richard Feynman, very famous physicist, Nobel Prize, and he worked on quantum electrodynamics. Quantum electrodynamics is the theory that explains the interaction between light, so photons, and matter, so atoms, electrons. So that's the big, your mobile phone, your screens all rely on quantum electrodynamics. So huge advance in physics were made through this theory. Now, in Italy in the 80s and 90s, two theoretical physicists, Giuliano Preparata and Emilio Del Giudice, were working in laser physics. And there they were looking at a problem of quantum electrodynamics, which is the interaction of many atoms with light. So in a lasing material, when you create a laser, you have a big chunk of matter, which is your lasing material, that starts to act as one and interact with light. So that creates the laser. And they were working on these theories, and they realized, well, what if we kind of relax the theory and apply it to not only to electrons, but to dipoles. A dipole is just a plus charge and a minus charge. We call that a dipole. And it so happens that in water forms these dipoles. So water has a natural plus side and a natural minus side in terms of electric charges. So water is electrostatically polar. It has a dipole. And so they said, well, what if we looked at the interaction of light with dipoles, and in particular, if we looked at it interacting with water? And lo and behold, they found out that things could happen, and they predicted these quantum coherence domains. So these domains of water about 100 nanometer across that would have particular properties, as I'm going to show. So this is straight from theoretical physics. So the theory itself is not debated that much. It's still being studied under other names such as superluminescence and superradiance. Its foundations are pretty solid. What it's saying is quite interesting because it predicts that there are quantum phenomena at scales that are larger than what is currently predicted in material physics. But it's not completely, we know this is happening. For example, here, we know that there are quantum effects in large molecules that are more than 6 nanometers. Some of you might have already heard this, that in the photosynthetic system, so in plants, there are effects of a quantum nature that are quite large, about 20 nanometers in length. And so we are getting used to the idea that in biology, there are quite systems with quantum effects on a quite large scale. It's not huge, of course, it's really, really small, but it's not just one atom. It's much bigger than a single atom or one single water molecule. So what we see also is in microfluidics that they reported some interesting results where in microfluidics, you want to reduce a whole lab uh, to a very small device, and you have so-called micro reaction chambers, and so you would get reagent A coming with reagent B into these micro reaction chambers, and so you might have your reactions happening on a very small scale. Now, what's happened, what they've noticed is that the reagents that were being mixed into the micro reaction chambers were not coming in smoothly. You predict, in principle, that A and B should completely mix and should arrive and mix nicely so that you can have a nice chemical reaction and some kind of readout afterwards. But actually, what they saw is that the solutes, the reagents, were coming into the chamber in terms of lumps, in go spurts, and that they were seeing nanostructures basically of about 100 nanometer in diameter. So this is completely independently of the theoretical predictions that I just told you. This is purely experimental. And they observed that this was valid across a number of solutes, so different materials at different concentrations, and also different solvents, particularly for polar solvents. And they could show that this was not due to anything like nanobubbles that would explain the phenomena away easily. And yeah, quite stable. And so, and also another experiment that is very interesting that seems to go in the same direction is at the EPFL, so the university in Lausanne, so not far from here. And there they looked at what happens to water when it is being hydrated. So when you have the presence of an ion. So imagine you have one ion, say sodium, I know, and like for salt. So you would have sodium, so sodium ion, and it will have a lot of water molecules around it. Classically, so for example, for my PhD, when we did a lot of work on such systems, because I was looking at whole proteins, but basically it's also valid for one ion. And then our predictions were that that water would interact over a small distance with an ion, that the ion would be effectively shielded by water, and that after 4 or 5 layers of water, then there would be no effect anymore. And so what was surprising here for the people in Lausanne is that the effects they were measuring were much larger. They reported effects up to 20 nanometers, which would correspond to about 70 hydration shells, so much larger effect than predicted or by classical theory, such as the one I did in my PhD. And so one single ion would then affect about 1 million water molecules, so much, much, much more than usually thought of. So the stir of this particular discovery was such that one of my colleagues from university sent me this paper and saying, Alex, if this is true, then homeopathy is probably true. So to tell you, it's quite a fundamental, a big thing. Another thing to keep in mind is that it's actually a bit of a theoretical blind spot what we're looking at. When you go to the regime of millions of molecules, um, the brute force approach, which is like just hammer it with a computer and see what happens, well, it's very difficult to do because we just don't know how to hammer the quantum mechanics of a million water molecules. It's just not been done. And we don't really know how to do it. We know how to do the quantum mechanics of 100 water molecules, and with a few tricks, maybe more. But a million, we just don't know. So we are a bit of a blind spot, theoretically and in terms of computer. And so the idea here is that there might be actually a room for an explanation of homeopathy that is not actually so wild as people might think. So here's the idea then. So we have our quantum coherence domains, and as I mentioned, from the theoretical point of view, they're made out of an oscillatory behavior of the multimolecule. Basically, they oscillate between two states. And this leads to the idea that this oscillatory behavior could record frequencies of the environment. And say here that you have a protein, and we know that proteins have very specific frequencies attached to their function. Because like different modes of functioning of oscillation of proteins. And the idea here is that these modes can enter in sync with the frequencies inherent in the water coherence domains surrounding. And so you have a way that the coherence domain could record this specific information. We have also, from theory and experimental measures, a strong indication that these domains would tend to clump. That is, they would tend to stick together if they have similar information. And if they have dissimilar information, dissimilar frequencies, they would tend to separate. This phenomena has been documented in other fields of physics. It is not particular to this demonstration. And so it would lead to the formation of aggregates that would tend to then stabilize each other. So that's a crucial ingredient. And then let's see what happens now with these few ingredients. And we just say that we have a simple dilution. If I just simply dilute my original substance and the coherence domains, then nothing happens. Eventually, I have nothing there. And that's basically what, the skeptic's point of view is. There is nothing there. Now, if I add succussion to this, then as I succuss, what I'm doing is I'm introducing energy into the system, and energy that's capable of breaking up the clusters I just showed you, and to spread those clusters around the medium, the sample, such that at the end of my succussion series, there would be a spreading of the information around the whole sample, such that when I do the dilution, I lose a lot of the original substance and a lot of the information. But if I succuss, I'm able to rebuild the information, although I have less of the original substance. And if I dilute again, I only now carry information-rich coherence domains. But if I succuss, I can carry it across and my whole sample. And in this way, I have no original substance left, but I have kept the information that corresponds to the oscillatory pattern, to the frequency pattern of my original substance. And then all is left for me to do is to give this to a patient. So I take it out and then put it close to, say, a protein here. And if the frequencies put in the domain and those of the frequency match, then I can have constructive interference, constructive or destructive interference between the frequencies that are in my domains and those present in a particular protein. And therefore, I can affect biological systems, either increasing certain reaction, decreasing other reaction. Like I can regulate many processes just by having the right frequencies for my proteins. Again, this idea that you can regulate proteins purely through frequencies is not a novel idea. It's been done before, and it's been demonstrated to work. So that idea is not particular here. So here, with this, in principle, I hope I've shown you that, at least in this very simple formulation, it is possible to formulate a plausible theory of homeopathy, high dilutions. As I said, it's still being fleshed out, and I'm just giving you kind of the bare bones. And I'll give you more in a second, but I just wanted to give you like the the core of what the theory could be. And as I hope I've already shown you, it's plausible in the sense that it's built upon ingredients that come to us from conventional physics that are not very disputed, that are actually being researched and make sense to a physicist like me. The idea that water molecules would uh, have no effect around them, that there would be no quantum effects on relatively large scales in water doesn't make much sense. We know that there's these quantum effects all over the place in biology, in big molecules. Why would it not happen in water? You can reverse the whole argument and say it should be there. We just haven't really looked for it in many ways. Now, I wanted to go a bit deeper now and give you some more kind of pictures of how to think about this. And so the idea, first thing is to think that, to realize that I'm giving you a very simplistic picture of these quantum coherence domain as kind of little round blobs. The picture you probably should keep in mind is probably something much more like this. We're talking about, so this is cymatics from John Stewart, right? And it's this vibrational patterns in water. And and you probably should keep something like this in mind as a much more complex set of oscillations in a very small area of water. And so the full kind of big words to express the idea would be that it would be a quantum. So that's what I said, it's quantum coherence. So it's quantum. It's oscillatory. So I told you it has at its heart an oscillatory pattern, and quasi-stable structures. And quasi-stable because we've noticed that uh, these water structures don't seem to be entirely stable on their own. You can, if you boil them, they go away. If you completely shield electromagnetic container, then they tend to go away. They can be affected by electromagnetic radiation, so ambient phones that seem to affect them. So we call them quasi-stable, and quasi-stable also in the sense of dissipative structures, and that's from Prigogine, Nobel Prize, who on this particular term, that there are structures that are not entirely stable. They call them dissipative structures, um, and that they become stable when they interact with an environment that is able to provide them with, in this instance, ambient electromagnetic radiation. So we know that it could be, we suspect it's interaction with the Schumann radiation, Schumann frequency, which is the natural frequency of the Earth electric field at 7 hertz. So that's just the atmosphere is all the time kind of humming at 7 hertz. And we suspect that that is an ingredient which the water molecule is interacting with. And so to go further, I wanted to tell you about, I told you about that it should be able to store information. Well, how does it do it? And just to give you an idea, I want to refer back to the work of Dr. Imoto, who probably many of you know. And so he's famous for giving us beautiful pictures of water crystals. And I just took two here, water crystals, just to show you how complex these water crystals can be. And I'm just thinking that complexity is what we're looking for when we're trying to record the complexity of remedies. And so, again, just an idea, just a picture for you to keep in mind that that's the type of complexity and finesse that we're looking for. Um, Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of propagation of information. Now, um, I told you how if you succuss the sample, it will spread around. But we've noticed certain experiments where it seems to happen by itself if you give it enough time. So Professor Leonie Bonamin, for example, in Brazil, has been looking at the propagation of this information through systems of lakes. So that's been quite interesting. And so what we think is happening is that um, if you imagine a group of water molecules, and I like to use an analogy like they're having a party, they're dancing, and they're dancing to a particular tune. And nearby, there's another group of water molecules, and they're just listening in, and they're just like, oh, okay, I know that tune. And so there's an entrainment phenomena where they start to do the same thing, to dance the same dance, to oscillate in the same way. And in this way, you can get propagation. And what's interesting about propagation is that we've noticed in a number of experiments that this propagation can go through glass. So there's a number of experiments that have shown that is seem to go through glass or through space at a certain distance at about 10 centimeters maximum. It's not a big effect, but it seems to be able to go through glass, through cloves. A lot of homeopaths report effects when patients simply carry the remedy with them. You know, a homeopath might say, please just put it in your pocket for a while. And that seems to work to an extent, and that's compatible with this type of effect. And so more specifically, similarly, we have this, we call it the field effect, and that was studied by people like Benveniste and Montagnier. And specifically, so here, if you leave a sample for 19 hours, 18 hours plus, it will can start to carry the same information. So these experiments were done by Montagnier, for example. And what's interesting is if you you can block this by putting a sheet of mu metal, which is known to block electromagnetic radiation. So again, the idea here is that on the left here, you have your sample and it's doing its thing and it's vibrating and it's emitting a particular signal that can carry information to the next door sample or be blocked here in this case by a mu metal. Now, I also like to, sorry, oops, what happened? Um, to introduce another idea, which is a evolutionary argument. That this argument is that if this effect of homeopathy exists, that is, that water can carry information that is useful, can be used by life, by biology, then primordial life would have most likely used this effect. And it would have used it in very funny ways because, say, there's a poison around. Well, this poison would be emitting a particular set of frequencies, a particular melody or leitmotif in terms of electromagnetic radiation that the cell might want to get, acquainted with. You might say, well, wait a minute. I recognize this particular leitmotif and I better scamper because it's not good for me. And so life would have evolved ways to listen in to this particular song that's being around, to get away from dangerous situations and potentially to find places of nourishment and so on. And uh, while the argument for single cell is quite simple, there's no reason to believe that higher animals and mammals like us would have lost that at all because it's still very useful to be able to do that. I'll tell you a bit more in a second. But so there's good grounds to believe that if such a phenomena is at all possible, then we would, as humans, most likely still be very sensitive to it. And so to tell you a bit more about that, then there's been an interesting experiment done on flies regarding this idea of bioactivity. So the idea here is that mostly the current theory is that the olfactive system is sensitive to molecules. But this experiment shows that actually it's sensitive to vibrations. And the way that it's been done is that you can train flies to seek out a particular smell, a particular molecule. And so it's called the maze test. And then you set those flies. And the really wild things here is that these flies were shown to be able to differentiate between what's called deuterated odorant and an undeturated odorant. Now, deuterated just means you replace the hydrogens in your molecule with deuterium, which is just an extra neutron onto the hydrogen. And it has it makes chemically no difference. Chemically, you would not detect it. It would, do everything you expect it to do chemically. It has the same shape, everything. So the molecule will be identical in that sense. But its frequencies associated with the molecules, the way it vibrates, would be slightly different. And so these flies are able to see the difference between deuterated and undeturated. And that means that they're sensitive to the vibration, because that's the only thing that's different between the two. Chemically, they're exactly the same. Only thing different between these two smells is their frequencies. So flies can do it. They can they can tell the difference purely from a vibrational component. And so really it leads us to think that this lock and key mechanism, which is central to biochemistry, is maybe outdated. And so I'm sure you all know, but the lock and key idea is that there would always be a molecule that enters an enzymes or membrane receptor, that it's this deep binding that creates reactions, and that's the the foundational thing of all of biochemistry. Now, the thing is, it might be outdated, and at least these experiments seem to show that in humans, for example, here, the same experiment was done as with the flies. It turns out you can also train humans, or humans can train themselves, to distinguish between deuterated and undeturated. And so humans receptors, human smell, is also sensitive to frequencies rather than just of the actual molecule, the shape of the compound. So that would mean, so we can go even further in the next experiment that I want to show you, which is a homeopathy experiment this time, where they were using low doses of histamine in the very famous experiments of Montagnier, of Benveniste on basophils. And turns out human basophils, so part of the allergic pathway, are sensitive to low doses of histamine. You can do the experiments. They've been done like 20 times. Now, what turns out to be really, really interesting is that if you block the H2 receptor, that is the histamine receptor, with a molecule, standard molecule, which is known to block the H2 receptor, so it's called cimetidine. So you can just block the receptor. It's incapable of interacting with histamine anymore. But the really interesting thing is, if you do that, you block the receptor, it also stops being, so the whole system, then the cell stops being responsive to the homeopathic histamine as well. This would indicate that the histamine, the homeopathic histamine signal is also coming through the same receptor. That is, the receptor itself is sensitive to the frequencies of the histamine homeopathic preparation. So there's a whole new way then of thinking about how homeopathy works with living systems. So here, the membrane receptors might be directly sensitive to homeopathic remedies. And it's probably not just membrane receptors, but it might be very specific molecules in our systems, in our biology, that are particularly sensitive to particular signals. And that's how we can modulate our biology very finely to clues in our environment. So with that, I'm slowly getting to the end of what I wanted to talk to you about today. But I hope I've been able to demonstrate to you that it's possible to formulate a plausible theory of how homeopathy works. As I said, it's definitely not final. It's not perfect, but it does hold all the ingredients we could wish for in terms of explaining the various effects that we see in homeopathy, the dilutions, the information storage, the bioactivity, the working through glass, the stability of the system. All these aspects seem to be well explained within this theory. So we're talking, and just to recap, we're talking about water-based structures that would be very common, actually ubiquitous in just normal water, and that they would be probably very intertwined with life and the origins of life, that they would have a much greater role probably than we think in how we interact with the environment and this whole sensitivity that we have with our environment. And they would be able to record complex information, and they would be bioactive in these subtle ways that I mentioned. Now, this is like a kind of a demonstration, a proof of principle that it's possible to do this. I also wanted to kind of open up the discussion with some more thoughts that go beyond this. These are much less established, and they're there for thinking. To many of you, I'm sure that if I talk about biofields or radionics machines or structuring devices or the morphogenetic fields of Rupert Sheldrake, you'll tell me, yes, that's all very interesting, yes. And even if I talk to you about human intention and the experiments of Lynn McTaggart and people like that, you might know about them. If you don't, I really recommend these two authors, Sheldrake and Lynn McTaggart, who have been pushing our understanding, or at least our appreciation of like phenomena that we don't really consider much. But what I want to is to link up these phenomena with water. And for me, water seems to be a crucial ingredient in all this. And I'm thinking, well, what if water could be a carrier of intention? So I've shown to you how it could be a carrier of information. That is, it can take matter and store information. But what if it could carry our intention as well? So from human to water, from matter to water. And in that sense, we might be looking at a new class of phenomena, which I call, just for lack of better words at this point, a matter imbued with a field of intention. And you'll see that this topic comes through from multiple authors before me, and I just mentioned two of them. What does this mean in terms of future research? Um, well, there's deep questions as to how do you think about replication, our whole concept of materialism and logical positivism, that everything in nature has to be local, both local in space and in time, that nothing is possible out of that framework. Then I think we slowly need to relax those constraints. There are many experiments that seem to indicate that we should. This whole extreme scientism that we see, that everything needs to be shoehorned into these very materialistic theories. It seems it might be time to start to relax. The statistics, we all love good statistics, and we need probably to rethink how we do statistics in the future. When we have Bayesian statistics now, and but it's going to be interesting how to follow how this is going to go. So as I said, a new class of phenomena, and also one aspect is this freedom versus forcing system, that we are inherently part of the system. We know this from quantum mechanics that the idea that we are separate from other system we're looking at is just fantasy, that it's not true. We should always consider ourselves as part of the experiment, and there are many experiments that demonstrate this. And so we need to take this on board also in our understanding of homeopathy. And so with that, I just wanted to finish off. And I think really it's a beautiful thing to see that homeopathy is, for me, very much at the boundary between matter and light. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tournier. That was amazing. I think I'll have to rewatch that to grasp those concepts, but you have a wonderful way of explaining some things that are maybe new to a lot of us, and so wonderful that we can have something to talk about with it, because the implausibility thing comes up always, it seems, with scientists and medical people who are not really on board with homeopathy, and great that we have more evidence that we can share with them.
Thank you.
I think we have some questions. And here's one. Is alcohol used in the production of homeopathic remedies relevant to the process you are discussing?
Alcohol is used, and alcohol is also a polar molecule, therefore is predicted to have similar properties as water. It's not as polar as water, but we expect it to do similar things. Nobody, to my knowledge, has done experiments in pure ethanol. I always have this water compound, hence my particular focus on the water.
Okay, thank you. Someone's asking about, are homeopathic medicines able to retain their effect after passing through the X-rays in airports, the luggage and hand luggage scanners?
I think so. They seem to be relatively resistant to just a short passage through these machines. At least, yeah. What information I have is that it takes quite a lot to destroy them. I mean, well, like you would have to stay there quite a while.
And another question is, what type of nano microscope did you have to use to show this reaction in the potentized solutions? Did you also use radio waves?
I'm not sure about the question. What type of instrument?
I think that was a fairly early on question. Victor, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the context of it. Perhaps
Okay.
to
Uh,
clarify.
so I should different experiments in one of with the iron is so-called femtosecond spectroscopy, which is a quite recent form of spectroscopy. It's looking at frequency, like vibrational modes of matter on a very small scale. Um, but yeah, I don't know exactly what the question is.
Okay, there's a complicated question here. I'm going to try and tackle it. The person says they've read about the coherence domains and consider it plausible. However, they have a question. Nano associates basically refer to the same phenomenon of coherence domains, which aggregate into superdomains and can store information in gigabytes. However, one objection remains. Demangate maintains that these entities have not been directly demonstrated by spectroscopy since the dissolved gas nanostructures he has detected with NMR proton are smaller than 100 nano something nm, and there is as such no direct formal proof. How could the theory of coherence domains overcome this obstacle and apparent incompatibility?
So first thing, yes, it is very much the same theory as the nano associates. There's a whole group of experimenters and theoreticians looking at the same thing, different names. Nano associates is mostly the Russians that use that word. So we're looking at the same things and the same ideas that they would cluster. There's ways to have bigger clusters and to complexify. I agree. Now, why we're not seeing them? Well, it, I don't know. The first thing is maybe we have ways of seeing them. There's the experiments of Dr. Lowe, which I haven't shown today, but maybe I should add to my presentation. Dr. Lowe in California, if my memory is right, used he had something called the double helix water, which was basically homeopathy, and he used liquid phase um, tapping microscopy. Um, um, the exact term escapes me. Basically, you can go microscopy and you have a little finger that goes over the structure, and you can do that in a liquid phase. And he was able to show uh, water structures there. Now that has not been replicated. Um, Now, generally, I agree with this person that we have not yet found a, a prediction that could be well experimented and proven. It's an interesting fact that the theoreticians working on the uh, equivalent theory from a completely conventional side, the uh, theory of superluminescence, superradiance, are also in the same problem, is that they are also debating how can we, finally get out of the problem and have an experiment that shows this. So this seems to be a general problem, like deep within the theory, how to prove it. We have, I don't have the solution for that either, and that's probably one of the problems with it at the moment is that we don't have a good thing that we could prove and demonstrate experimentally at this point in time.
Thank you. Here's another question. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that your colleague sent you a paper saying that the layers of water molecules around an ion is more than 4 to 5 layers thick, and that this increase in layers could explain that homeopathy is probably true. I'm not sure I understand why this is important in explaining that homeopathy works. 4 layers as opposed to many more layers. Could you explain that piece one more time?
Yes, sure. Um, the argument was more that that conventional theory, we have no way of explaining this large of an effect. That that uh, our current water theories predict 4, 5 water layers. We need a completely new theory that does not exist in conventional water theory to explain this large of an effect. That's the idea. And so my colleague was just telling me, if this is true, then our current understanding of water has a massive problem, and it needs something like coherence domains. It needs something significant, so significant that homeopathy might well be true from his point of view.
Thank you. A question, does this mean that certain medications like antihistamines taken to relieve symptoms would block the effect of homeopathy for someone seeking relief from those symptoms? For example, someone with mast cell activation.
No, no, no. So an antihistaminic, that's fine. I mean, yeah, don't worry about it. I mean, we're not, the experiment I was talking about is a very, very specific drug. It's not a standard antihistaminic at all. So no worries there.
Thank you. Is it possible to be more accurate to speak for dynamic fractality on quantum level and not about holography? I'm sorry, there's some spelling there, I'm not sure.
Yeah, talk about holograms as a way to store information. Didn't go into detail here. Dynamic fractality on a quantum level. Dynamic for sure. Fractality, I'm not entirely sure that we're looking at fractals in a meaningful way. We might in the same, but it would be in a limited sense of like similar patterns could be, but there would not be an infinite scale. It would not be like, it would be more like the water pictures of Imoto. There's some kind of self-similarity. But yeah, okay, so huge question. Very, very interesting. But yeah, so how water could do that, crystals, all the right questions, but yeah. Can't go much.
Thank you. Another question, with this model, can you also explain the increase in potency or strength of the homeopathic remedy with each dilution succussion process, or would that be a different theory?
It's a good question. For sure, as we go through potencies and higher dilution levels, we anticipate a slight modification in the information that's being propagated, being stored. Cyril Smith did some work on this, predicting that um, that they would be the higher frequencies. I think that's what he was predicting, and that therefore that would have more subtle effects and higher effects. But literally nobody knows at this point, really. Yeah, it's just conjecture at this point. I want to answer. I see the question here about thermal noise. Let's thermal noise electromagnetic. I don't know that particular technique. But I wanted to ask, there was a question about thermal entropy. I just saw it flash. And one of the interesting things about the quantum coherence domain is that they would not be directly subject to entropy in not as they could be shielded from entropy in many ways. They could not be subject to loss of information because of the quantum effect that would shield them from loss. It's a possibility. At least it's an interesting ingredient in terms of why remedies could last so long. So that's the idea, that normal entropy would dictate that information would get lost. And in homeopathy, what we see that this information does not get lost. It can remain there for years, decades and more. And that seems to be quite compatible with the presence of a quantum effect, where we know such quantum effects can shield the system from the so-called thermal erosion, this entropy issue.
Well, thank you. Someone's asking if it's possible to get a copy of the presentation slides, and if so, how would they do that?
I think I think we can discuss that together afterwards.
Okay, yes. So we'll keep people informed if that's a possibility. So someone has a question about it. Is that why homeopathic remedies have less efficacy in treating Parkinson's, because the dopamine receptors are already blocked and therefore not able to respond to the remedy? Or can a remedy still be useful in improving whatever it is that causes the receptors to malfunction in the first place?
I don't know enough about Parkinson and its treatment with homeopathy to answer really that question. I think Parkinson, so one of my uncles is suffering, and then yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Does a remedy in pellet form, which has already been succussed, need to be succussed again if placed in a glass of water before taking it?
So this idea of plussing, I would say shaking is a good idea. We know that like this theory really would put forward that there needs to be a shaken, yes, I would say,
Mhm.
to propagate the information around, yeah.
Are the structures called nanoparticles, or is that term incorrect?
It's nanoparticles are a different idea. Nanoparticles, um, um, they're not necessarily water. So nanoparticles, that could be silicates, could be traces of different metals and minerals um, that we know are present in the homeopathic remedy. So they've been studied, in particular by Indian researchers, and they've been shown to be present. But they're quite normal, and we expect them to be there because you can't have pure water is very, very hard to get. It doesn't really exist. So we always expect some kind of impurities to be present in water or in our water ethanol mixtures. And so we always really expect some kind of nano particle to be there, more as a sign of impurity rather than as a sign of that it's got something to do with how homeopathy works. So nanoparticles, yes, they're present, but probably, in my view, not causative to the effect of homeopathy. Um, and what I'm talking about is nanostructures, water-based nanostructures, mostly water, doing this oscillatory pattern. Nanoparticles are just a bunch of atoms, silicates, silica structures. They're very classical. They're so atomistic, classical. They wouldn't vibrate in any particular way. So there's quite difference between these two theories.
Thank you. Someone's asking if you think that frequency is the basis of herd immunity. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
It's a good question. I um, don't know. As good. It's oof. Uh,
You don't have
I
to.
I have to think about that one. How do we have herd immunity? Um, don't know. Possibly that there is a vibrational component. Don't know.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Maybe with contagion too, right? Like, who knows?
Yeah, maybe it was contagion too. I mean, for me, clearly, one of the interesting consequences of this theory is that we're probably much more sensitive to environment than we want to think, or that we have been led to believe by our kind of current theories. So like yeah, so for me that we're much more sensitive, I would say, and so herd phenomena, um, yeah, possibly.
Uh-huh. Very, very interesting. How is your research being received in the scientific community at large? Someone's asking.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yeah, homeopathy is out on the limb. Homeopathy research. Um, we are part of a group of researchers that are, called fringe at this point. But we're not alone. I mean, because we have a lot of colleagues from Chinese medicine, from uh, anthroposophy, from different, strands that actually have very different ways of looking at health and disease and face similar issues. And we find a lot of synergy with them. Um, I believe that homeopathy is pointing us in a certain direction, that we need to kind of think a bit differently about health and disease. And there are many other complementary medicines also pushing in the same direction.
It's kind of exciting times, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when we've got people like you doing such important research. A couple of people are asking about having their remedies sitting next to each other based on what you mentioned about the
Yeah,
energy or the frequency can pass through glass.
very good
So
question.
yeah, what do you want to say? Anything about that
So,
or?
so, so I've been asked that question a few times, and the idea here is that I showed you the idea of clumping, and the idea of clumping is that things like once the information is created in one sample, it would be relatively stable. It's doing its thing and it's self stabilizing, so it's reinforcing each other. And so if another remedy comes nearby and it's doing its thing, then they don't hear each other. It's like, if you have a party in your flat and there's a party next door, you don't hear next door and they don't hear you. But if somebody in next door is having a party, you hear it if you're doing nothing. And that's what we tend to see in practice is that if we have a blank sample that has no information, it will tend to pick up stuff.
Oh,
If it
interesting.
have already information, it seems to remain stable.
Interesting. Someone's also asking if you consider pillules or liquids is one more stable than the other?
I don't know. They both seem to be quite stable. But the
Another
water,
question. Sorry.
the liquid form, of course, has a problem with biofilm. That is, as soon as you have liquids in general, I mean, you have to have quite a bit of alcohol to stop the formation of biofilm. And we know biofilm will degrade homeopathy, that's for sure.
Thank you. You mentioned boiling breaks the structures. Does freezing break the structures also? Can what disrupts your structures help us know what actually can destroy a homeopathic remedy?
Yeah, I mean, we know boiling does it. Freezing, I don't know. And there's different types of freezing as well, right? You can, if you freeze, instantaneous freezing, slow freezing. Well, nobody's really looked at that as far as I know. So yeah. And sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Um, can what disrupts your structures help us
Okay.
know what actually can destroy a homeopathic remedy?
So really, we're looking at what destroys and affects the signal to better understand possible theories, possible modes of action. So if it can boil, if it's destroyed by boiling, okay, that tells us something. If it's destroyed by mobile phone, then that tells us something. If it can act at a certain distance, then that tells us something. So we're building slowly kind of a set of requirements that any theory needs to have. And so that information about what destroys it, what affects it, is really helpful to us and really the things that we're looking for to build a stronger theory.
Now, Victor, I know you're looking through these questions too. Am I missing anything, or do you want to ask a few of the questions, or should I keep going?
Oh, I think you're doing great, and I think we've covered most of them. It seems like we've addressed the bulk of the questions. Yeah.
There is one here about how can the coherence principle be measured, measuring the ions? Thank you for your amazing work.
We need, so that's going to be, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, hopefully they're pursuing that research right now on the salvation of ions. Again, it's just the more you study exactly what's happening with an ion, then there's not that many theories that will be able to explain that phenomena. Typically, uh, like the theories I worked on as PhD, we consider the ion as a single atom and then water molecules around it, and it's just point charges interacting classically, no quantum mechanics. And I think very, quite quickly we will need to say this is probably a quantum phenomena of some type and revisit the interaction of the ion with the water molecules. And at that point, that will go into the direction of the quantum coherence domains that I've been showing.
Thank you. Here's a question that's interesting. It's not really a homeopathy question, but it's maybe you want to weigh in on this, Dr. Tournier. What are some of the implications for the water that humans consume with respect to the information carrying information and or intentions? And how can we change the information and or intention in the water before we consume it?
Oh, so that's a whole huge topic. I think it's important. It's there are places like the water conference I go to sometimes that really deal with that. It's not my central area of expertise, but I do think it's something to think about. I don't know enough really to say much more. I think it is important, but I wouldn't want to go there too much.
Sure, understandable. Okay, I think is
Oh, yeah,
succussing.
so I just see somebody mentioning the work of Veda Austin. Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she
Work
sure is.
if you can, it's mind blowing what she does. Yeah.
Were you at the water conference in Lisbon last October, Dr. Tournier?
Unfortunately, I was sick the morning I had to take the plane, so I did my
Oh,
presentation online. So my
oh,
presentation,
so you were a presenter at that conference.
yeah, so you'll find pretty much the same presentation at the Water Conference, yeah. Mm.
Ah, okay. Is succussing the pellet format as effective as succussing the liquid format in altering the properties of a remedy?
I've I don't think many people succuss the pellets. I haven't heard so much that about that. Uh,
Hmm.
so that doesn't seem to be very common. Succussing the liquids, yes. Succussing the pellets,
Hmm.
less. I don't have much information about that.
Okay. Well, maybe we should wind things up. I know it's late for you in Basel, Switzerland, and you've given us so much of your time and expertise, shared your expertise. So
It's a
um,
great pleasure. Thank you very much.
thank you so much for joining us and your wonderful presentation. And Victor, I'll let you sign off here. If anything else you want to say?
Great. No, I think this was a wonderful presentation. We have a lot of interesting questions that everyone has asked. And just to reiterate, the recording will be available on the YouTube page, which has been posted in the chat. So please do share the recording widely, share it with your colleagues, with anyone you think might be interested. And please do keep up to date with future webinars. As we've discussed at the beginning of the presentation today, there are many fascinating webinars that are planned for the coming months. The details are all here. And if you'd like to get in contact with the coalition, you can visit our website and all of our information is there. Thanks again for all of your attention and for the great attendance today. And we look forward to seeing you at future presentations.
Thank you.
Good night.
Hop là.